Welcome to Heart Warriors Radio with your very good-looking host, Mr. Jeff Casper, and Ms. Jona Bryndis. You can learn more about them by going to the website at transCODES.com. You can learn more about Heart Warriors Radio and hear some of the older shows we've done at OuterLimitsRadio.com. Jeff and Jona, how are you both doing?
Hi there.
Hey, doing great. Yeah, definitely glad to be here.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. And tonight's topic of discussion is going to be about the California earthquakes. Now, if you, I don't know what your perspective is out there, but I guess if you're devoutly, religious, God doing this for the sin, for the people out there, behave, who knows? Maybe that's the...
Sorry.
It's because of those people, that lifestyle. Gay marriage comes to the U.S., that's God. Angry, growling, California earthquake. I don't know. But I imagine that you guys probably have a different perspective.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Was that your perspective, right?
Yes. Gay marriage. God angry. Big one coming.
Yeah. I mean, the big one coming, is the topic that we've been talking about since 2012, I think.
No, since
that's true. But since 2012, it's really been more in the foreground. A lot of people have visions. A lot of people have this distinct, premonition that the West Coast in the U.S. is going to have a big event. The big event, not just in California, obviously, but for this whole entire tectonic constellation that is there, which would affect the entire Pacific West Coast. It's very real for people who have premonitions and who have visions, all the way to having these swaying experiences during the during the day. And I've received a text from someone living in LA during the 7.1 a couple of days ago, and she said it's so weird. It feels like you're on a boat and it's swaying. It doesn't feel like a normal earthquake. It feels like it's going back and forth, and people are getting seasick from it. From my perspective, this is something, I'm from Iceland. I grew up with earthquakes and with living.
Iceland? There was a lot of earthquakes?
Well, Iceland is the other end of that very same tectonic movement. It sits right on where the American and the European earth plates, where they meet, and there they pull apart. In on the Pacific West Coast, they crush into another. Okay, so in Iceland we see kind of the same thing, just kind of like the opposite. So things are pulling apart there, and the land is growing. Okay, and so just growing up in this awareness, for me, earthquakes have always been part of the natural phenomenon that is going on. So there is no God's wrath involved in that. That is a very scientific phenomenon. All right. The fact now that it's that people have the feeling that there is something cooking. All right, which can be confirmed by some of the measurements in Yellowstone, and everywhere, like in Iceland, they're waiting for the big one as well. So this will all happen at the same time, because when the American plate, when that moves, right, it doesn't just, create a problem here on the Pacific West Coast. It also creates a problem on the other end. That's where Iceland sits. All right, so they're all waiting for the big one because it's overdue. All right, is this something that will hit us harder nowadays? I believe so. Because these earthquakes and these movements have always been there, but because we have become so fragile in our infrastructure that we depend on the stability of so many things and all the constructs, the buildings and so forth that we have. And the amount of people that live around these areas, that is what makes us very vulnerable, especially in California. So it is to be expected, that this will affect a lot of people's lives, not just in the drama sense of like this big earthquake coming, but in the sense that things are changing. Coastlines are shrinking, water levels are rising, glaciers are thawing, they're melting. So all these things are real, okay, and they will have an effect, and they will also affect the seismic activity that is there. Mm-hmm. That's a non-brainer. All right. What you can do if you live in those areas is, with what we as energy healers recommend people and train people to do anyway, is to be present as you can, and to really feel in your heart so that you can listen to your inner guidance. See, people who are energetically sensitive, I mean, everybody really, but people who are energetically sensitive, they'll be able to interpret this a little more clearly. They will get messages. They will get the message to be at the right time, at the right place at the right time. And this can only happen if you are in touch with your inner guidance. If you try to, pretend that everything's normal, and you live your life in your ego reality where you're just trying to maintain status quo and try to hold on to what you would like to see, then it's difficult to respond to those kind of things.
Right. Well, do you think that these earthquakes could be the physical manifestation of the collective unconsciousness of the people in California, or maybe the animals? Maybe the animals want something to happen. Maybe the animals are not happy that things are out there, so they want the earth to kind of take aim, or maybe this is a manifestation of a previous civilization that it maybe all called at one point for California to be destroyed, and maybe it's taken years for this thing to finally kick into gear.
No, I don't go with that. And some people may, but it's more there's been earthquakes in places where there's no people, for a very long time. So it's just the very aspect of where the fault lines lie. California lies on a major fault line, and Iceland lays on a fault line. The one in California is very tumultuous, and there's been a concern for as long as we've been recording seismic activity that something big is going to happen, because it could. It's a giant fault line. Does that mean anything to do with the California people or other civilizations? No. It's just the very aspect of being on a fault line. And because of the tectonic plates, they're going to be at some point, there's going to be earthquakes there, and eventually they'll.
Hello? Hello? I'm sorry, Jeff, that last part got cut off.
Oh, okay. What did you lose?
The part where you said the major fault lines is going to be cut off.
Okay.
The major fault lines.
Well, people living on the major fault lines, that's a choice, and that doesn't mean that that they're tied to those fault lines. They just chose to live there. Now, is there a karmic propensity that they could have picked that spot because they need to go through an experience of a giant earthquake? Sure. But it's not anything due to other than it's just a natural response that nature has based upon the system we live in, which is tectonic plates pushing up against another. Every once in a while they shift and creates some interesting situations.
So the way you see it, I mean, I don't know, everyone says that, okay, Nostradamus predicted there are going to be earthquakes, there are going to be all these calamities and all this stuff. You always hear that end of day stuff. But what do you guys think? Do you think this is something to be worried about? Or is this kind of the earth just, burping? Earth burp or something?
Well, you really can't do much about it. I mean, the earth, we can't stop earthquakes. I mean, that just, you can't stop tornadoes, you can't stop, hurricanes, all this. It's just natural. That's nature. Anytime we attempt to do that, usually it goes quite bad. So all you can really do, like Jona was talking about, is you learn to be energetically sensitive, to feel out, is this where I want to be, to learn how to calm yourself, learn how to center yourself, especially if there are those kind of situations occurring, no matter if that's an earthquake, if it's a tornado, if it's a hurricane, whatever. You learn how to stay calm. You learn how to stay present, so you can act accordingly and not just react in a panic situation. By learning to manage your energy, you have a higher potential to one, not only be in the right place, but two, to be able to handle it better, even if that right place happens to be in that intense activity.
And Jona, from your perspective, what do you think is going to happen in the future? I mean, as far as these earthquakes and other events go, when you see a earthquake, you see another natural disaster, is there a metaphysical, spiritual component to it that takes away some of the bad energy in that particular area, or kind of restores it, even though there's chaos happening?
This is really difficult to put this into context with another, because when it comes to divine nature, all right, it's something that we as humans, so to speak, barely understand. Okay, so for us to come up with these explanations is more like a superstition. Now, is there a metaphysical component to why people feel attracted to certain areas? Yes, there's a karmic component, like Jeff already said. But just because my family and my grandparents and my great grandparents have lived there, doesn't mean that I'm a bad person, that I'm attracted to like a zestful. All right, it means that there is something in my soul purpose here that I brought with me, incarnating in this planet. That predestines me to go through a certain experience for my own higher good. Now, what's more interesting is people who feel that they are, sort of in the wrong place, or that they feel like they're not resonating with what is going on in a certain geographical location. And that is something that we are feeling right now very strongly all around the world, that people feel like they don't belong where they live, that they sometimes also don't feel like they belong to their family. So there's a really strong tendency right now for people to go into karmic reconciliation and to outvibrate these karmic attachments that they came into this life with by moving somewhere else or finding a new family, like literally through resonating with other people, sort of forming their own new tribe. The way energetics are going right now on this planet is that they are increasingly speeding up, and this happens like literally from 1 week to the next. And the problem with that is that the people who are in this awakening process, they are beginning to see that they're not alone with this, and that they're that this is all becoming fluid now. Like if you think a few generations back, you were born into a town, and that's where your family came from, and that's where you stayed. Nowadays, you have a lot more options. And with energetics speeding up, not even physically on this planet, in nature, but in general, people have more options, okay? And this is what we need to focus on. We need to focus on, what we can choose and making better choices. Better as in, not as in good or bad, but better as in more harmonious, more conducive, more life promoting for ourselves. Right? The planet's energies are speeding up, and that is not something that has to do with the wrath of God or anything like that. That has to do with I believe, the number of people on this planet. Because with the increasing population, we also have an increasing consciousness field here that needs to evolve. And so the more people we have and the stronger this impulse comes in, the faster the evolution has to go. And sometimes that leads to, sort of like an evolution with animal species or with plants. Sometimes this leads to some natural selection, where the population has to reduce because some conditions that were created weren't optimal. And then this event or this development that leads to this reduction then renews everything, and then comes sort of an upgraded version into play, so to speak. So, the meaning of California here as, say, driving force in the movie industry, in modern society, if you sit there long enough, you can always come up with some kind of superstitions about that. But if you really just look at it from the larger perspective of the planet and look at the age of the planet, it has no significance. Yeah. It has no significance whatsoever. Okay.
If no one lived in California right now, there'd still be earthquakes, and a long enough timeline, there'd be huge ones or small ones. So it's a phenomena that just occurs, and yeah.
And it's really the first time in the history of humans that we have this sort of long time of expecting it. Okay, we have all this technology now that can give us these warnings, and we know that this is going to happen.
I don't know why, but I mean, everyone. What do you think about the religious people who say, it's because you did something for Jesus or something? What do you respond to that? I mean, is there any kind of response? Is there any logical response? You should just say, just keep drinking your coffee or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it depends on the person. Some people believe that, so if they believe that, then go for it. But typically, if someone's saying that to you, that is their viewpoint. It's a viewpoint of a deity that is outside of them that can punish us for being bad, and that's typically an outdated view. In a metaphysical sense, in a true spiritual sense, a deity that is outside of you that can harm you for being evil or for being bad or for being making mistakes is a very old version. So I wouldn't try to tell them that, or you'd have some interesting conversations. It's best just to accept that's their view, and doesn't mean you have to go for it.
Yeah.
People will always use that. When you have views that are based on externalized sources that are typically emotional based, they're going to take the circumstances that fit and add it in there.
Yeah, I still don't understand the whole earthquake thing. I talked to somebody a couple of weeks ago who believed the Earth was 6,000 years old, and I said, "What about dinosaurs?" And he's like, "That's just an assumption. They're all, So I don't know. I guess maybe is it even pointless to convince someone? But if you're on that,
No, it's not worth it.
If you're on that path, and you really, I mean, is there something that you can actually gain from these experiences, these natural disasters? So I imagine that when these disasters happen, hurricane, earthquake, big fire, a lot of energy gets released. So is there a way you can actually benefit off it? Can you kind of ride the momentum of the energy that's being produced and kind of use it to your advantage in terms of growth, in terms of evolution, in terms of projecting yourself to a different place?
Absolutely. And this is probably the only question that ever matters. In that you are forced to leave your comfort zone.
Yes.
You will have to rethink. You will have to re-feel into what is essential for you, what is sacred for you, what your values are, what you truly need, what you truly want. Mm-hmm. In that, it allows you to really get to the core of who you are and your own integrity.
And what matters to you.
Yeah, it brings out the best in people.
Mm-hmm.
Crisis brings out the best in people, and anyone, I think, would agree with this. If you look back in your life, it is the moments of crisis that have propelled you forward, and not the comfort zone. Not, when everything was hunky-dory and you tapped on your own shoulder and thought, everything is fine the way it is.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Listen, PR business, I told you guys a bunch of things where I've had situations with a crisis, and it's terrible, it's stressful, but for some reason there's a certain rush out of it. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, it forces you, like Jona said, it forces you to do things differently. You have no choice. If you have no running water, or if your house gets destroyed, or if you go through some version of loss, it forces you to change. It makes the ego kind of subside a bit, because you have to move into what's important. If you go through a really bad crisis and you have choices to make, you figure out real quick what's most to you.
Yeah, I mean, first it brings up the ego in its raw form, which is the survival, the self-preservation. But then very quickly, and especially if it's a collective disaster of some kind, we talked about this before, it also has the potential to bringing people together. It's a very beautiful thing. Unfortunately, it often takes those kind of experiences to bring people together. But that's when people realize how much they are in this together, and how they're not this individualized, segregated, separated cog or part of the system. They're all really in the system. We're all in this together. And therefore, it's not really something to be afraid of, other than perhaps, would I get an earthquake insurance if I lived in California? I would.
You get it.
Just like we live in Florida now, and you have a hurricane insurance when you live in Florida. It's the same thing, okay? So that you don't, lose everything. But if everybody loses everything, it's completely different. And you see people really ramping up. You also see people giving up. But that's, in the nature of us maturing, evolving, and forming resilience. We become stronger through this.
Completely agree.
So it's something that if we can just look just a step outside of the box and not just see sort of what we can lose, if we can also see how this can actually bring new opportunities. It's like a reset button. It brings a whole new view on things. It brings new connections for people. Yes, there's also loss involved, but oftentimes it leads people to really growing into the more true version of themselves, and therefore can bring back meaning and purpose in life. So many people today are depressed or anxious because they've lost that touch with themselves, with their own heart, and don't see meaning in life anymore. I hate to say it this way, but a disaster in somebody's life or a crisis can bring meaning back.
I hope it. I don't know. I'd rather go about the easy way and a nice, peaceful way. But a crisis happening has to happen.
I agree.
It's the only way it's going to happen for people. The only way when they're in a crisis.
But that's the consciousness level. When a person is very much in touch with their environment and the people around them, when a person is already connected, all right, with where they're at, then it will be much more harmonious. So it's the level of connection ultimately that brings people, or that determines how people experience this, but also that brings people together ultimately, and that can bring this sense of we can do this, all right, we can form resilience and we can grow through this. So this is actually, every study has shown this is the foundation for happiness, is resilience, is that feeling that you can do it, whatever it is, that you can overcome obstacles, that you can overcome crisis. That's what makes people happy. So we could throw, the question in the air, is the reason why so many people are unhappy nowadays because we haven't really had enough crisis. You could also look at it the other way around. It's a bit harsh, I admit, but when it comes to measuring happiness in life, then it really comes down to people experiencing that they are able to overcome adverse circumstances. And the way we have sort of built our lives and with all the conveniences and so forth, there's very little challenge to that nowadays. So we recommend our community to get into the habit of challenging your ego every day. Every day. Do something that is just a little uncomfortable, where, you don't even get into this inertia that makes you become blind to the things that are going on around you. The best tip, if someone lives in areas like that, is to have a good connection with neighbors, with everything that can make them strong in a time of crisis. That is the best tip.
Well, that concludes today's Heart Warriors Radio program. I have to say, this is awesome. And if you are living in an area where the earthquakes are happening, just remember one thing, what we discussed tonight. Jesus hates you! No, I'm just kidding. It's, Jesus. Everything's gonna be fine. You're gonna be okay. Just get up and dance. Have a good time. I want to thank our amazing, good-looking hosts, Jeff Casper, Jona Bryndis. You can learn more about them by going to their website at transcodes.com. And I have to say enough is that you go to their sites. They do these amazing seminars. There's also well-written things. I think they're very cutting edge. And you can also see or listen to our previous shows by going to outerlimitsradio.com. Jeff and Jona, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.